Thank you so much for being patient. I really appreciate it. I'm Director of Programming for EXPO Chicago. It's my great pleasure to welcome you today to the kickoff program for EXPO Art Week, a series highlighting the vast cultural opportunities that Chicago offers collectors, dealers, art enthusiasts, and visitors. Presented in conjunction with Choose Chicago, the city's tourism and marketing organization, and Chicago's Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, today through Sunday. This Thursday, EXPO Chicago opens our 10th anniversary. This conversation is part of our Dialogues program, presented in partnership with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. It offers panel discussions, conversations, provocative artistic discourse, leading artists, curators, designers, and art professionals. Today's conversation in celebration of the third iteration of Skin and Masks features artist Erol Scott Harris, Armani, Lola, Ayisha, Ogbara, in conversation with exhibition curators, Mensa, and Chanelle, Lacy, of each of their creative processes. The group will discuss what it's like to be an artist in Chicago, the landscape of the city's art ecosystem, and what their participation in the blockbuster exhibition has been. Make sure to find Lola's work as part of EXPO and DCASE's program Override, which presents work from local and international artists on digital billboards across the city. This conversation is presented in partnership with the Magnificent Mile and Kavi Gallery, who are also partners in this exhibition. Gertie, a discovery and engagement platform for Chicago's art and cultural scene, and Pigment International, a multimedia arts platform for Black art creation and innovation. If you need any captioning during this panel, there are QR codes located at the back. That way you can follow along on your phone or tablet. Now, please join me in welcoming our panelists. Hello, everyone.
Okay, right in the middle, Lacy.
I'm the director of Kavi Gupta. Thank you all for joining us this evening for what I'm sure will be a very fruitful conversation. It's really exciting. This exhibition initially started last summer, and never did we imagine that we would end up on Mad Mile. So it feels really special and really true to the gallery's mission of amplifying underrepresented and marginalized voices. So really excited for this conversation, and I think we're just going to dive in.
No doubt.
So first, I would love to ask each and every one of you when you first began identifying as an artist. Armani, let's start with you.
My dialogue with art making and identifying as an artist didn't really start that early for me. I gravitated towards more like soccer and skateboarding, primarily skateboarding to be honest. And then it got to a point to where I wanted to find other outlets in which I was able to sign up for After School Matters, a Chicago-based program here in Chicago. And with that, I found a skateboarding design program. Little did I know that painting would kind of pretty much give me an outlet that I didn't even think was possible. I started having dialogues within myself that my mother, my family, my friends never were able to give me. It just basically became therapy. And then from there, I pretty much just kind of stuck with learning and practicing. And I think it's once I hit my late teens, early 20s that I kind of sat and had a moment with myself when I looked with my work. I looked at the dialogues that I was having and I was like, I think I might be an artist and this is something that I should continue to nurture and actually embrace it. So yeah, it was roughly, it was a slow burn, but it was something that I allowed myself to nurture and actually like treat with care and respect. So.
I got a question for you too, Armani. In my practice of art and music, I like to bring my ancestors into the room sometimes when I'm writing. Like I find that some of my most brilliant lyrics will come when I open myself to be a channel for that ancestral energy, as a griot, as a storyteller, which is what each and every one of us with a paint or with a pen are. When I look at your work, like this painting, for example, it feels very ancestral to me and amorphous in that way. I wanted to ask you what, if any, role thoughts of your ancestors play in your painting practice.
It's the largest part right now, to be honest with you. I think when I started to gravitate towards art making and identifying as an artist and knowing that I was an artist, I realized the nurturing that I was looking for was answers within my legacy. I unfortunately lost my father as a child, and so when I started to piece him together, it was always through conversations of his family, my mother, his friends, but it was never an actual realization of who he was, right? And so here I am puzzle piecing him together. And through that, I was raised Buddhist. My mother was born in Thailand, moved here as a child. So being raised Buddhist, you tend to have like an esoteric view of the world. You kind of like look at things from a worldly lens. So as I was finding and trying to nurture this dialogue of my father, I think I was finding more of myself and the way I navigate as a human. And it's something that no matter what background you come from, the conversation you have with your ancestors is a staple. So in this day and age of technology and media and mass production, I wanted to reconnect to that conversation and bring it into a new day and age. So what does it look like to reconnect with my ancestors? What does it look like to have these conversations and nurture them with now tons of access and tons of information that I can like find almost a finite answer to it, you know? So it's now it's spiritual almost at this point. The studio practice is extremely spiritual for me. So
I love that.
Lola, would you like to share when you first began identifying as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't really one moment in time that I can kind of point out. It's always been with me. I think as children, we're all artists. I think it's really up to us to kind of continue that and kind of embed it in our destiny, I think. But I don't remember that pivotal point. It's always just been inside of me or beside me or within me. But yeah, I mean, I guess in my formative years, when you're trying to figure out what you're gonna do for a living, I knew I was gonna be a doctor. And art was the only thing I was really good at. So I started to take courses and, you know, kind of hone in the focus on that and kind of solidifying that as a career. But yeah, that kind of led me to a more traditional art background and going to undergrad and getting an MFA. But yeah, it's always been with me, to say the least. Yeah.
Erol, would you like to share?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Lola, the fact of like needing, like it was always in me, you know? And I grew up playing instruments, so that was my first way into, you know, the arts. Cello, first started with saxophone, then started with cello.
Me too, guy.
Cleaning that thing
Reeds and shit.
the reeds. And having to make it work if the reed was split.
Yo.
And I think also too, like I grew up also having to learn to make it work, and that also, what I was saying about instruments is I knew I had to have work through a material, like I had to work through an object to express myself, like through some force other than me, than my body. Like I had to use like whether it was an instrument or a canvas or something to kind of express myself and put myself through that. And I kind of like lived behind that, and I kind of always known that that's my way to communicate to the world. Yeah, and then my mom brought home this Basquiat book one time, and then it blew up my world. You know, like I didn't even know that, you know, there was an artist that could just create so automatically. And I remember just trying to copy every painting of a Basquiat painting. But how do you copy a Basquiat painting? Like it's done within the process of making. You can't really copy it. The layers happen within the moment, and it's so you know, within that space, you know. But I think trying to copy it made me realize it opened up a lot of doors for me that I had structure. I had so much structure around with learning instruments because, you know, playing cello, you have to hold your body a certain way. And kind of painting kind of allowed me, and going through Basquiat allowed me to kind of like let go of that structure and those things that kind of constricted me down. And now, you know, it's just a place for me to kind of continuously just to explore. Yeah.
My question for you, piggybacking off of the Basquiat conversation, I was going to ask you, like, how you identified your style. I think that as an artist, obviously we are an amalgamation of our influences, and I often will see artists or think about my own trajectory and be like, here's this time when I was trying to sound exactly like that person, you know? And then you mix in another influence, then you mix in another influence, and the voice develops. And like the style that you're using right now is so ill and unique and abstract, and I wanted to ask you, what were the building blocks of this particular style?
I think it was like trial and error. Like I was like just being a human being. I was trying to also figure out who I was growing up from not knowing, like just trying to, I think I was trying to wear a lot of hats. And I think through experiencing, realizing that those hats collapsed because it wasn't me. I didn't want any hat to wear that I could see out in the world. And what I realized with this practice that I have now, it's all within the form of my body. So it's out of the mind. Like I can't say like I can be like that person. I can, like, it's nothing I fabricate in my head. It's everything that has to fabricate at the edge of my skin. You know? So it's all, it is what it is because it's all based on touch.
Does it represent skin at all? Because
It
your
feels
work
like
feels
skin.
like skin.
It feels like skin. It's all based on touch.
Also, for reference, everyone, Erol's piece is this immediately to our right, as well as some of the vinyl graphics that you see on the ground.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Erol, I'm going to piggyback off of Vic's question. Do you feel your ancestors when you create?
Yeah, I do, and I think about different locations where I'm making my heart, like making prints with my body. Like things that I make with my thighs and my arms are a little bit more direct and just kind of about the print. But things that are prints that I make with my chest, I'm thinking about the heartbeat, kind of making a ripple into the pigment and the liquid within the pigment, and kind of making this kind of geometric shape, you know, or an imprint. So I think when it's based off like the alignment of my spine, which is thinking about the chakra systems, I'm thinking that those systems, those spaces within my body are having an effect on the pigment and imprinting. And what I'm doing then, I'm feeling like I'm immortalizing myself, because as artists, I feel like what we want to do is immortalize ourselves. And beyond me, when I'm not here, you can go up to my painting and say, oh, that's how big that artist's foot was. That's how big how his hand was. That's his wingspan. And that feels good for when I'm not here. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well,
I didn't know he was leaning up against the paint. That shit is all coming together now. No, but low key, man, that made me want to ask you a question. Like, I find that in the midst of intense emotion, like deep sadness or rage, like sometimes it can be difficult for me to create art. But then also some of my most beautiful work will come from that. When you're experiencing things like that, knowing that you're like literally touching the paint, do you feel like you're able to transfer that into, do you try to get in the studio when you're dealing with intense emotion?
For sure, it's a safe space. My studio is like it's a temple, you know. It's its own. It's a shrine, you know, that I can operate and perform on, you know. Yeah, I feel like it's automatic for me to go to the studio and express myself. Like that was how it was when I was painting on things this small. Like when I was little, this small was huge. Like, but now it's like, now I'm operating in the world, so my world's gotten bigger and it's just gotten more expansive. But having to operate within a rectangle or square or within a fixed surface is a way that I can just disassociate and then reassociate into a new space.
That's hard. Turn up.
Armani, I'm going to circle back to you. Would you mind sharing with the audience just a little bit about your background and how that's influenced your work?
Yeah, so like earlier, my mom's from Thailand, so when she moved to Chicago, she moved here roughly around, I want to say 12, 13. She grew up primarily in the Humboldt Park neighborhood, so at the time, well, even still now, primarily Puerto Rican neighborhood. But for me and my brother, we grew up in the Rosen neighborhood, far south side of Chicago. So with that, I always kind of had this, I've always had like otherworldly questions in some way, and I guess the best way to kind of really even expand on that is more so that I felt different in my neighborhood because I always had this different factor that wasn't a staple, and no matter where we moved, we were kind of like an oddity almost. So I would say at a very young age, I would always ask myself, like, where do I lie? Where do I identify? Who am I? And within those questions, I think that's where, even just to kind of like respond to what you both mentioned, like, I don't think like there was ever a moment where I was like, oh, I am an artist, or I am a person, or I just felt human, you know? And I think with that, I've kind of looked at the world at a very gray scale of things. So I never was super definitive, like, okay, cool, this is where my mother's from, this is, because my mother didn't even really feel like connected to where she's from, because it's like you move to a new country in a predominantly different neighborhood. So like, even for ourselves, like growing up, like Christmas was like Thai food, soul food, and Puerto Rican food. Like that was like a normal like holiday thing, you know? And it's like, so like even when friends would come over, that was like, oh man, like what are you guys doing? But I think that also like started to nurture a lot of the conversations I take now as an adult, that like traveling, experiencing new cultures, being able to allow yourself to be some form of glue, so that way you can give anyone and every person some sense of normalcy. Because you can meet someone in a different place, or someone in a place, and they can still feel uncomfortable. Like, you know, from a lot of the travels that I've had, I've been able to go somewhere and been like, oh, I think this person is this, and then you start to talk to them, and you're like, this person is a whole different walk of life, and it's sometimes nice for them to hear like, oh, you know this food from my culture? Okay, let's talk more. Oh, you know this? So like having that background also like segued into my work, because I think I've kind of stood away from trying to make things that were like hyper representative, because I don't feel that way in my existence, and I wanted to represent like my emotion and my existence more so than anything. So I think a lot of the ideas that I paint more so speak on a universal dialogue of existence, right? I want to speak on what love is felt like from any walk and background. I want to paint what pushing for your family to grow, what does that look like? And so with that, again, with that diversity, I tend to like step back and be like, okay, cool. How can I represent something that isn't so much of a border, but more so of a feeling? Like, how can I represent a feeling? And as humans, we all feel the same, no matter where we come from. Like, I can be from any background, and it's still, we all experience grief, love, happiness. And so how can I bring things down to its square essence of that, you know? So.
I think that the way you articulated that really fits in perfect alignment with the conceptual framework that I developed for the show. And when I was coming up with it, I was reading Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Masks. And in Black Skin, White Masks, Fanon is dissecting the psychological ramifications of colonialism and slavery and domination, race in general, you know. And there are many difficult concepts in the book, one of which being his complete shattering of race. Yeah. So there's a moment in time when he's like, the black man is no more, the white man is no more, there are just human beings, you know, and all I demand or deserve from you is to be treated as such. So when we were doing the first iteration of the show, it was all black artists because that felt best at the moment, but it was always in my mind, like, I think that to be honest to this concept, it's gonna have to reach beyond any barrier of race, which is something I love about your work. Honestly, all three of you guys' work so much, is that it doesn't feel bound by, anything as fickle as race. Like, I was having a conversation with an interviewer from like Spin magazine today, and I was saying race is so unsteady because here I'm black, my experience personally, here I'm black for sure, I have a white mom, but you wouldn't know if I didn't tell you, When I go to Ghana, I'm a white man. They call me white man. They be like, I don't think you should be walking around late at night. They don't like white people walking around. I'm like, man, I'm gonna be all right, bro. I'm gonna be all right. Then when I go to South Africa, I'm colored, with a U. Yeah. Colored. Yet and still, I feel like a black artist, but I also just feel like an artist. So I feel like a conversation, dialogue / argument that I see between our community a lot is like some people being like, just consider me as an artist, I'm an artist. I'm not just a black artist, I am an artist. Because it could feel like they only want to break you out during Black History Month. For sure. You know what I mean? For sure. By the way, this Black History Month, they wasn't passing out Black History Month checks. That shit was kind of whack. I was like, bring that back. But you know what I'm saying, though? It's like you can be pigeonholed by that. So I guess my question, which is to anybody that wants to answer, is do you first and foremost consider yourself to be an artist? Or do you first and foremost consider yourself to be a black artist?
Oh, you all can go be alright. I feel like a human first, man, to be honest. Like, I think like we're at a breakthrough right now as a world that like we're starting to really understand the vastness of this diaspora of just humanity, right? So like, even now I still have a hard time like claiming to be an artist because I'm like, well, I'm just doing the natural flow of all civilizations have done. They experience this thing called life, they regurgitate it, and then they capture it. And so even in this moment in time, like, I sometimes do have a hard time still being like, oh, I'm a black artist, but I've come to terms in some facet to understand that my work is inherently going to be black because I am black. My work's inherently going to be Thai because I am Thai. It's inherently going to be Midwest. It's like it's going to be these things because I have been able to experience all of these aspects of humanity. So, I mean, it again may go back to the esoteric view of things, but sometimes I'm like, I'm just a human, man. Like, everyone wants to do the same thing that I think artists do. Like, we all want to find a way to represent ourselves in some facet, and there's an art to the way we talk, there's an art to the way we love, there's an art to the way we dress, eat, like there's an art to all of this, and it is breaking those social structures to understand that like, okay, I am still expressing myself in some facet, so I am an artist in itself. Art, like living is an art, like this existing is an art, because you're able to like take these different elements and bring them together and hey, this is my experience and this is what I'm telling you. So, I mean, I know the importance of cultural grounding and being able to make sure that these cultures are represented, and I don't push that away, right? But I think it's more for the world to understand that I am not less of a Thai artist just because I have this blood in me. I am not less of a black artist because I have Thai blood in me. It's like these all come together and they create this new dialogue that we're all learning to navigate, and it's up to artists to actually push that dialogue forward, So.
Yes, sir.
Lola, Erol, would you like to take a stab at that question?
In some ways, I agree. Inherently, my work would be seen as black, but I would consider and identify with being an artist first, straight to the point.
Yeah, I think I agree with being first a human first. Like, I think I've tried to work on myself as being a human more so than being anything first, and trying to understand the system that is in my shell. you know, like trying to master that space before anything, and then letting that kind of work its way out in whatever form it has to be. And if it so happens to be that I have to change what I do, then because that system's telling me to do that, then that's what I'll do. But at the time, it's telling me to be an artist. And I would have to say, if I'm answering that question in the relationships in my work, you know, I feel like, again, it's like about, I think I identify, yes, there's this brown skin on me, but, you know, in the studio, I can be very much blue one day, and I can be very much red as well. You know, this is just something that's with me all the time. So, and what people identify with. So, yeah, first a human, and this is what everyone's reading right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of what this exhibition seeks to explore, is how we can connect beyond the parameters that society enforces on us, so beyond, you know, the politics of visibility, because often our skin is what you see first, and that can be such a divisive approach when there is so much beyond that. I think most of you said you see yourselves as human first. So I think that's a really beautiful answer in the context of this exhibition, because that's what we're seeking to do here, to connect on a human level beyond what you see in the mirror first, or what, you know, people walking past you on the street are going to see. So kind of leaning more into that, how do you feel that your work fits into the context of this exhibition, of seeing yourself beyond the politics of visibility? Anyone can take a stab at that first.
I'm trying to remember the politics of visibility thing. Yeah, like, you know, when I was thinking about that, that verbiage, that wording, politics of visibility, I was actually, I was studying this Nigerian philosopher named Bayo Akomolafe, and I just stuck with Frantz Fanon because I was like, I didn't want to get too confusing, you know? But Bayo is very interesting because his work discusses the like philosophical context of African spiritual systems. You know what I mean? And I think that all of our work, but like all of you guys' work, is very in alignment with traditional African spiritual systems. The things you're saying, Armani, are just like so directly in line with the things that our people inherently believe, you know? And so Bayo's discussing the depth of our identity beyond our skin and our outwardly appearance, because we come from traditions that not only acknowledge the existence of other realms and of ancestors and spirits, but dive into them, you know what I mean? Like shamans and medicine men that cross those borders intentionally and go specific places, you know, to interact with spirits and ancestors and energies that are just so beyond this physical dimension. And like in transforming that school of thought into a group show, into an art show, I did want to make sure that there was more like, that there was more abstract work within it, you know what I'm saying? Because a lot of what we do is like figurative, you know what I'm saying? And like, and I think that also the commoditization of Black bodies just lends itself to the fact that like, that's a lot of what people want to buy from Black artists. It's like, you know what I mean? They want to see a Black face painted. And so I guess like, that makes me want to ask y'all, how do you grapple with that? Does that ever occur to you? Obviously you're expressing yourself as you feel fit, but does it ever occur to you that it seems like the most sought after art of the Black community is usually like people, like faces and bodies, you know what I mean?
I mean, I feel like to even just like expand on that and go into that, like, I just always wanted to abstract my existence. Like, I felt like as a young kid, like studying in school studying like Greco-Roman work, you're like, how are these people able to like dream this, and this is what we're studying years later, when this also exists in my community, this also exists in my people and my background. So I think at a very young age, I just always was like, there's more to this physicality, because there's something powerful about that. There are groups in other European-based locations that have created, like, you know, the story of Zeus. They've created Ares. They've created all of these gods and goddesses that, yeah, there wasn't a man with a head on fire. I hope that wasn't a thing, but the fact that that was a thing, and like we have now created like a belief system around that, and this is something that not only exists in those cultures, but are now pushed onto smaller groups and cultures. I mean, even going into religion as well, that is another thing, that it's all forms of colonialism. And I just feel like there was a point where I felt like my experience in life and the ability to abstract was being colonialized. Like, I felt like I couldn't even express myself in a way that wasn't this, like, this is what you can do, right? So it gets to a point to where, I mean, now I'm at the age to where I'm at terms with my decision, right? And I understand that I'm going to live in the way that I create, and I'm going to only live in that way. But I would say early years in my career, I felt very restricted. You know, there's so many times where my birthday is New Year's Eve, and the previous king of Thailand, that was his birthday as well. And so it's tradition that you go to temple and you celebrate not only the new year, but you celebrate the king's birthday. And so there would be moments I would remember like having conversations about what I do and whatever, and they're like, well, you don't make Thai art. And I'm like, who's making this decision? Like, you can't just like decide that this is what I'm going to do. I'm less of this thing, you know? And over time, I've started to realize that no matter what background or creed that you come from, everyone feels that they have a stake and claim in what your identification is. And until you own that back and you step back and you're like, no, this is just who I am, going back to the humanity aspect, I now no longer like fight this dialogue, because it's what the world needs. It's what our communities need. They need to be able to see that there are diasporas of existence. There are diaspora of how our story is being told and how it's being represented. It was frustrating at first, but like, again, it's like when being able to have that grayscale of things, I've just kind of like stepped away, and I'm just like, hey, I'll nurture and talk to the voices and the ears that want to hear, and then from there I can just continue to do what I do and navigate it that way.
I think it's quite obvious the space that we're in as far as the figurative work being popular and being sold on art markets, and it being kind of the art that you see that represents our current era that we're in. So I think for artists who are in the show and artists that go against that grain, to me, are very brave. I am someone who deals more outside of non-traditional art. A lot of people call it craft-based art because I'm working in ceramics, but even then I'm an outsider to that medium because I'm dealing with untraditional forms, biomorphic forms, something that's not necessarily inherently Black. And so in my work, since my work is non-representational, I try to create clues that become entry points for people to see themselves, but also see me within my work. The work that I have here in particular, in my practice in general, deals with a conscious, a Black haptic conscious. We talk a lot about touch. I know you mentioned touch earlier. Touch being kind of my experience in art. One of the very first experiences I've had at a museum as a child was in a group setting on a field trip to the field museum probably. And I can remember wanting to touch everything. And so I think there's this constant nostalgic stream of consciousness for me in my work through touch. And I see it in a lot of other Black women clay artists, but a lot of Black women fiber artists. And I think it's interesting that people are brave enough to go outside of the representational and tap into that. And so it's kind of a theme that I see in this gallery here, as far as the work that's on view. And so I'm really happy to be a part of a conversation that's not that mainstream, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely had moments where I definitely wanted to be figurative too. I can paint, I can draw and paint what I can see very easily. But I think for me, using my body was a way to be an abstraction, but also use the figure, like have it be both at the same time. And how those two things aren't separate, like the figure isn't separated from the landscape and the context that it's in. And sometimes I think as, wrist painters that are painting with their brush, it's all here. It's all here. It's just the energy of the wrist, and of course they can channel things through that wrist and let other things come out. But for me, I feel like in wrist painters, the desire is to use the whole body, right? You want to leave that whole body experience behind. So for me, I use that body. But also too, like I was thinking, like the whole idea of a painting, when we talk about making a painting, you think about the ground of a painting. Like you're applying a ground, and then you're thinking about, okay, what composition can I put in this ground? What figure can I put into this ground? And then you think of our ancestors who are pulling ancestral energy and figures up through them by, hitting the ground, and that's kind of working through them. So my point being about that is just like, I think that for me, going more towards a primitive place of making is what's important for me. Is like being able to conjure that space, be a vessel for that space,
So what does it mean for you, Erol, when you're in a space and you are expanding off of the typical canvas or the plane that we speak about in art, and all of a sudden your body is dripping across the floor and it's on the walls? What does it mean to take up space in that way for you?
It's primitive. I even have an alter ego name for that person, lore. Like it's literally like I can't even explain it. I can't describe that space. It's outside of Chicago. It's outside of the world. I'm just twirling around in the space and making these images because I can, and I say I can, and this is what happens. It just so happens to be that I accumulate all this material that nothing gets thrown away. Like the floor pieces, not one bit of my floor collages, any of the material gets thrown away. It gets used right back into the material, just like life.
So can
it
you talk
behaves
to us
that way.
also about what this material is?
We're
talking about floor.
So it's linoleum flooring. It's literally linoleum flooring that you see in everyday homes, that you can pick up from Home Depot and places like that, and the chemical makeup of it is very organic. It has linseed oil in it. It has, wood dust in it. So, I feel like I'm responding to that material. But for me, the reason why I have everyone walk on it is because now this material everyone's walking on is now going to have all your energy in it. And then I can then use that, for something later. And what it does is it brings me home. It's a place to think about dancing in my heels in the kitchen for my grandparents and family. That's where it brings me to. And that's all.
Yeah.
And that's just what it does. Yeah.
And what in particular about this flooring? What is that? How is that tethered to your family history in particular?
Yeah. So my family, a lot of my family, when they moved here from Mexico, they laid railroad tracks, and they also did a lot of domestic work, laying, flooring in places. And when they moved here from Michoacan, and so for me, it's a way of thinking like they were on their knees, laying floors for homes in Chicago all the time, going home hurting, making people's homes look good. But what if I was someone that just made a mess? You know, it was just like, I'm done with this. I'm done cleaning up. Like, I'm gonna make a mess and make a mess of myself, and I can formulate it and show it in galleries where it's looked at as beautiful. But what I'm enjoying is just being a mess.
Vic, I'll volley back to you. I think I've asked several questions in a row.
I was gonna ask you how you clean yourself after you.
How do you clean yourself?
It's a whole process, which is really interesting because like it's like a washing of my body.
We're gonna let some more people in for a second, and also let some air in. Sorry so much about this noise, but then once we start, just give you time.
Perfect, thank you.
I want to welcome to the floor Nikko Washington.
Nikko's work is directly behind us. These two works are Nikko Washington as well as a painting that's a little bit further into the exhibition.
Man, you know, one thing I was just thinking of asking you, Nikko, is like just having visibility on like your entire growth as an artist from like age 5, you know. Obviously in the past, maybe 6 years, you like the style that you're rocking now. I mean, your style's actually even 10 years ago, but it's developed a lot though. And you are making figurative work, but you seem to express the figure very loosely. And I guess I wanted to ask you, what was your motivation behind expressing figure in that way, as opposed to a more hyper-realistic thing, which you know how to do, I've seen you do, but you've chosen to move in this direction?
That's a great question. For me, honestly, dealing with the idea of perfection was a big thing coming up in school. Trying to replicate something was an idea in itself, but to me it already existed. And when I try to make work, it's more about the idea of the subject, more about the surrounding nature of who they are as a human being, and not more so of the likeness. So I think I get caught in likeness, and I think people get attracted to that, whether it's a celebrity or not, and that becomes the entirety of the piece, rather than the soul of that person, or like the entirety of like the situation, the gravity that they have. So I realized to combat that, I had to make my figures look like something else, and more the idea of that person, more taking images for myself, or 3 photos from different angles, different people, and making a composite photo of this person. That you know, it's not, because I don't make it. Let's say I did a piece about Serena Williams. It was a Wonder Woman series, but I made sure it was a very like sort of excruciating looking pose and face. It was like the power behind each strike, and not to say it wasn't flattering, but it wasn't for her. You know, it wasn't for her to, you know, hopefully she appreciates the work, but it's about the idea of her strength, of her power, of her being a GOAT and not being talked about enough. You know, in the mainstream media, to me, was what music was about. You've seen it, you all seen it. So I think that was the idea behind it, but it wasn't about capturing likeness. I think when you have realistic work, I think it's so beautiful, but it has a different conversation, you know, the dialogue with the work that you're having. So I'm having a different conversation.
That's hard.
So I'm going to ask a question that we kind of touched on earlier. I want to know what everyone's first experience was in an art space, whether that's a museum, an art gallery, and how did you feel in that space? Armani, let's start with you.
I was super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like, I think the first time I've experienced what I thought at the time was like fine art or high-end art, I just didn't feel like I was accepted in the space. I had eyes watching me the whole time, so it wasn't like a very open arms experience. I think that changed once I started to find spaces that I think were in line with what I wanted from my practice, but also for my belief systems. Yeah, to be honest, it was unfortunately from like higher institutions that I kind of felt that energy from, and it's primarily because of I felt like that work wasn't for me. If we think of a lot of museums, I would primarily speak of museums. When I think of a lot of museums that I experienced as a child, the work was either work of my people that wasn't for me, but it was for other audience to experience my people. So when I tried to occupy those spaces, it didn't even feel like it was an extension of myself. It was just kind of like, okay, well, go to the next room.
Yeah.
Obviously, over time, that dialogue has changed, and I think in this day and age, there's this force and pressure from just our people to be able to be like, hey, no, if you're going to occupy these objects, if you're going to use these objects, then we have say in how they're represented. So it has changed a lot over the years, but the first one, my first experiences weren't the best, but I didn't really take too hard to it. You know, just kind of was like, hey, this is where we're at right now, and we'll just revisit this when we need to.
Yeah, Lola, I'd love to hear from you. I know you mentioned a little bit earlier, but anything else to share on that point?
Yeah, I guess reflecting on some of the first times I've shown art or have dealt with art and art contexts. I mean, I've come from a very like outsider art world before all the institutions, and so me showing art for the first time was a part of probably an art fair, like a community art fair. And so community has always kind of been my foundation. I'm an artist, but I'm also an arts manager and arts leader. And so just as much as I am creative and I express myself through a bunch of different mediums, I'm also allowing opportunities for other people to do the same. So whether that be through curating or programming, et cetera, community has kind of been my base and the foundation for both my art practice and my community practice. And so I found myself reflecting back to those times where my first show was definitely a community-based kind of context. And so it was community-led, I think by an art collective in St. Louis, Missouri. I spent a lot of time in St. Louis. Even though I was born and raised in Chicago, I spent about 7 years in St. Louis. And ironically, I arrived in St. Louis in 2014, and I think that's around the time of the uprisings and when Mike Brown was killed. And so having that and being in that atmosphere kind of radicalized my practice in a lot of ways. And it made me dive headfirst into community because that's what was needed at the time. Whether we were protesting, whether we were working through the tension and having to be in community with our oppressors, you know, it was an interesting time to say the least. And so I carry that with me. I carry a sense of community that is tight-knit, that is held accountable by each other, and a community that is welcoming and, you know, that is representative of all walks. And so, yeah.
Thank you. Erol?
Yeah, I saw you ask that question on what you were saying. I was trying to think about like when my first time was to a gallery or to an institution, and I couldn't really remember other than high school. And then I couldn't really think about what that experience was like, you know. So then I was thinking, okay, there has to be a moment, and I remember like thinking of walking into specifically my uncle's on my dad's side room. He lived in the basement, and he's been living in that room since he's been born. You know, he's like in his 50s now, 50s, 60s now. Just goes to work, comes home, goes to work, comes home. But he has like all this like assemblage of just stuff that he's created, like just got over the years. And it's just like insane. And I remember walking in there being like, whoa, like, whoa. Like there's like girls in booty thongs and stuff like that. Like, you know, Egyptian heads and the Black Jesus, you know, like, and it was just like, like a lion, you know, one of those like suede like blankets and stuff, and it just being like, whoa, this is a space. And then I just thought that was just the idea of, that brought me to a place of thinking about time. The idea of like collecting over time and being diligent and being in your own little bubble in time and marinating in that space and what it can create. And that's the same experience I get sometimes when I go to galleries, but I think first it happened at home.
That reminds me of your studio. Leaving out the girls in thongs.
Go.
That studio sound busting. Studio.
Yeah. If you saw the Instagram, it's me.
This shit a movie.
No, but yeah.
Folks know.
Nikko, I'll let you also answer this.
Okay. Honestly, like you said, like home. Like I think your parents' crib. I mean, seeing the Frank style pieces. My mom's. I come from a family of artists, artistic people. My uncle was a collector. He bought my first piece, and I remember he made it a point to like, you know, he was like, how much is it? Like $100. Like instantly bought it, and he has it still hung up around like, you know, just like brilliant works of art that he's collected over the years through his travels, and just seeing people's like different cribs, and like you said, the black family, like outside of the museum trips at high school, Chicago does a really good job of that. But another program, honestly, Gallery 37, right here in Chicago, really, at a young age, taught me that this was a path that you can take. When they paid you to create work that you chose to make, you know, and I think something that was so powerful about that in Maggie Davis' program, and I hope they still do it, and I think they do, but it just gave you that motivation that you need to keep going, to see that it was real, or to just like assign value for your creativity and your creations. And that's for me like the first institution that, you know, really stuck with me. Outside of like my uncle's crib, my mom. I mean, this like she would always frame my drawings too, as bad as they were, whatever. She would frame them next to the stuff that she had, just to make it real, tangible. So.
That's beautiful. Thank you all for sharing that. I asked that question because often within the art world, within art spaces, there's a lot of gatekeeping, and people that look like us are often not welcomed in those spaces. So the gallery's mission is really all about inclusivity and about opening our doors as wide as possible. And this exhibition is proof of that, because we have reached a wide audience that I think it may have been their first time entering a gallery space. It may have been their first time looking at work on the walls, but that doesn't mean that they're not welcome. And the experiences that we've all shared here, you know, speak to how important it is to make art accessible, because every person in this room can walk up to a piece of work and walk away transformed or changed or impacted. Hopefully your mind is expanded. Hopefully you have some sort of interaction with the work. So opening our doors as wide as possible is an absolute pillar of the gallery, and this show, I think, just really speaks to that. And Vic, your reach into the community, into pockets of Chicago that we may not have found ourselves in, and the connections we've made with artists have been really unparalleled. So thank you all for answering that question honestly. Vic, I'll volley to you now.
I didn't have a question, man. I was just thinking about how much we used to get kicked off the steps at the Art Institute. You know? And then now we in museums and galleries, you know what I'm saying? I think like that's the beauty of what we do, man, and like existing in this counterculture. You know what I mean? Because this is technically fine art, but I do feel like we all exist as counterculture artists, though. You know, like that's the spirit of hip hop. That's the spirit of what we do, and it's almost surreal to be in the same space on the same strip where it's like me and Nikko spent a lot of time getting kicked out of stores on the Magnificent Mile, chased by the police, like, you know, like. With always the intention of like, we were always creative, man. We was breaking the law for sure. And we should have got kicked out and chased. You know what I'm saying? But we were artists, and it's those experiences that I think ultimately have birthed beautiful work and, you know, given a sense of purpose and mission and drive to what we do. I mean, graffiti art for me is what brought me into my own as a creator. Before I ever rapped, I was writing graffiti. That was what inspired me, how I found my hands as an extension of my humanity. And I wouldn't have done this without having been a graffiti writer. Nikko did graffiti too, but he was no good.
I was gonna say, I was like, he was really good, I was really bad. The characters are my thing. So here we are.
And yeah, we had graffiti artists in the opening at the gallery. There was like dudes that you know they never been in the gallery, but they've been artists for decades. You know what I mean? Not just artists, but like legends. You know what I'm saying? You could tell that they're not even used to a gallery space. So ultimately, I'm just honored and glad that we've been able to create and inspire and share space in this way. I want to send the ultimate thanks to you, Chanelle,
Yes.
for just
Yes,
being the
yes.
truth.
I agree.
You really the truth. You know what
My pleasure.
I mean? So shout out my boy Kavi. I don't think he in here. I would know if he was.
You would.
Shout out to Kavi for just being progressively minded and having the spirit and intention of opening doors. And shout out to Abby Pucker and Gertie for just being beautiful people. You know what I mean? And shout out to Chicago EXPO. And you know, last but not least, shout out to every single person that has come to experience the art today or at any of the previous iterations of the show that support any of the artists in any way, or you know, are interested or inspired at all by what is going on here, because without you know, your participation and you caring enough to show up, you know, it'd be like a tree falling in the forest with nobody there to hear it. So thank you guys.
All right, I'm going to do a bit of a shameless plug for everyone that's sitting up here. Armani, you are participating in Boil, Toil, and Trouble.
Oh.
Shout out to Abby Pucker, the curator. Erol, you are also in that exhibition that opens on Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yeah, Wednesday. It opens on Wednesday. So everyone, please try to make your way over there. It's a really fantastic exhibition. This is the third iteration of it. So definitely make your way over there. Lola, you're participating in EXPO's Override, so everyone keep your eyes open for billboards around the city featuring Lola's work.
Let's go.
It's powerful. And Nikko, you're always doing a million things.
Yeah,
so
Nikko
everyone,
knows the
keep your eyes open for Nikko.
Nikko, you ain't got nothing going on with your life.
I do have a show opening in the Session 13 from
Yes.
9 p.m. to 1 a.m.
Wait, tell them about where you headed to, man.
Uh-huh.
What you got going
I
on?
just got into Yale.
Let's go! And when you start selling them $700,000 things, don't forget about your boy, man. Don't forget about your boy, man. I need some of that too.
And Yale is obviously a big accomplishment, but Yale's MFA program for artists is really, it's no small feat. So major shout out to you, Erol. It's literally the best. So remember that name. Remember everyone's name up here. But big shout out to you, Erol. That's a huge deal. So congrats.
Boom.
All right, we are going to quickly flip the space. Erol has curated a really beautiful performance that we're going to transition the space to accommodate. So if everyone wouldn't mind just standing up.